Okay, so this video is all about the rise of Thomas Cromwell, one of Henry VIII's chief ministers who rose to that position after the death of Cardinal Wolsey. So who was Thomas Cromwell, where did he come from, and how did he get to such a great position in Henry VIII's government? So Thomas Cromwell was born in around about 1485 in a part of present-day London called Putney. And what's interesting about Thomas Cromwell's early life is that he was the son of ordinary common parents. His father, according to the documentation, as far as we know, was something like a textile worker or a brewer or a blacksmith, or maybe all of these things at different stages in his life. What's important to remember is that Thomas Cromwell was by no means a nobleman, and he came from common stock. After being born and brought up in London as a young man, Thomas Cromwell decided that his future lay elsewhere, and he hopped on a ship and he went over to Western Europe. When he arrived in Europe, after some time he found himself working as a mercenary soldier fighting in wars in Italy. And in fact, this was a very positive experience for Cromwell in the long run, because it gave him experience of two things. One, European politics and the way in which that affected wars and so on, and also exposure to languages. He learned Italian and he learned French. So already as a young man, we can see that Thomas Cromwell is very adventurous, and he's picking up really important skills in languages and foreign politics. More than this, Thomas Cromwell later on moved from his job as a mercenary up to the city of Antwerp, which is today in the Netherlands. And at the time, in the 16th century, Antwerp was a major city and a major trading city. It was the centre of European trade within Europe to the Middle East, and in fact further afield to the New World in the Americas. So Thomas Cromwell got himself a job with a mercantile business, a merchant, and he learned the ins and outs of international trade. And in doing this, he learned many great skills in administration, how to run and organise a business effectively. So in around about 1512, Thomas Cromwell returns to England, and he is equipped with all of these wonderful experiences and skills that he's learned in Europe. After arriving in England, however, he again carries on training himself, and this time in law. So Thomas Cromwell trained himself as a lawyer, and by 1524 he has got a job working with none other than Cardinal Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey has seen Thomas Cromwell and appreciates and respects the kind of man that Thomas Cromwell is. He likes the fact that he can speak languages. He likes that he has got experience of European politics, and he really likes that Thomas Cromwell is an effective administrator and businessman. The fact that he's a trained lawyer gets Thomas Cromwell a job as Cardinal Wolsey's legal advisor. So by 1524, Thomas Cromwell, the son of a Putney commoner, has risen to the rank of Cardinal Wolsey's legal advisor. But this isn't where the story ends. He continues to rise through the ranks, and the key moment when this really begins to accelerate is with the death of Cardinal Wolsey. As Cardinal Wolsey's power begins to decline, Thomas Cromwell is the man to replace his former boss. So we're going to see what happened. So how is it then that Thomas Cromwell went from being Cardinal Wolsey's legal advisor to a few years later becoming Henry VIII's chief minister? Well, the answer is pretty simple, and it comes in two ways. First of all, Cardinal Wolsey was on a decline. He was in big trouble with the king, as we know, and on his way to face trial, he died. This left what we call a power vacuum. There was no chief minister helping Henry make his decisions, and for a couple of years, Henry does things by himself. He makes all the major decisions as a king by himself. However, slowly but surely, Thomas Cromwell is the man that is presenting himself to Henry VIII as the next in line to be the chief minister. He's proving himself as a great administrator, using those business skills, and he's proving himself as a great advisor in terms of his knowledge of European politics, which he earned as a young man in Europe. So the key date in Thomas Cromwell's rise to power with Henry is 1532. This is the year that was referred to as being focused upon the King's Great Matter. The King's Great Matter, of course, was his divorce from Catherine of Aragon, his future marriage with Anne Boleyn, or a marriage that he hoped would happen, and eventually the idea was a baby son. So all of this is all wrapped up, and we call this, or they called this at the time, the King's Great Matter. The king needs a divorce, he needs a new wife, he needs a baby boy, or he wants one at least. Now this is where Thomas Cromwell comes into play, because Cardinal Wolsey had failed to get Henry VIII the divorce that he wanted. Thomas Cromwell succeeded in getting him divorced. Well, how did he do this? The first stage of this process was that he convinced Henry VIII himself that he needed to break away from the Catholic Church and from the Pope. He then needed to set up his own brand new church, which inventively was called the Church of England. Who was going to be in charge of that new Church of England? Well, of course, Henry. So by breaking away from the Catholic Church, setting up his own church, making himself the head, he could eventually find a way, maybe to give himself a divorce from his wife. This was Thomas Cromwell's idea, and because of his personal nature and his skills as a negotiator, he managed to convince Henry that this was the best course of action to take. I don't want anybody out there to think that this was an easy process. Henry was a Catholic, he had been a devout Catholic his entire life, so to break away from the supreme authority of the Catholic Church was an incredibly risky, incredibly dangerous, and in some ways either brave or foolish, depending on how you look at it. It was no easy decision for Henry, but Thomas Cromwell convinced him to do it. So a few months later, there's another change which really helps Thomas Cromwell in his rise to power. This was Henry VIII's decision to make a man called Thomas Cranmer the Archbishop of Canterbury. The Archbishop of Canterbury, of course, has lots of power in church doctrine and the laws of the church, especially in the new Church of England. What's important about Thomas Cranmer is that he supported Henry VIII's divorce from Catherine of Aragon. He was also the key man to be supporting of the new Church of England. So Thomas Cromwell was central in convincing Henry to appoint Thomas Cranmer as the Archbishop of Canterbury. When Henry does this, Cranmer agrees to the divorce, he declares it valid. Thomas Cranmer then also agrees to the marriage of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. So now we can see that by getting Cranmer as the Archbishop of York, Henry has now had his previous marriage annulled and he's had his brand new marriage with Anne Boleyn consecrated and made valid. So all of this is the work of Thomas Cromwell in convincing Henry to make these decisions. So another stage in Thomas Cromwell's rise to power came in the next year, 1534. This is when Thomas Cromwell introduced to the Houses of Parliament the Act of Supremacy. It's pretty simple, really. The Act of Supremacy made Henry VIII the supreme head of the Church of England. This gave him authority over church doctrine and the appointment of bishops and archbishops, a really important role which the king certainly needed in order to force through the changes which would see him give himself the divorce and so on. So in 1534, the Act of Supremacy has now made Henry the supreme head of the Church of England. And of course, this was Thomas Cromwell's idea. So now we see that the benefits start coming back to Thomas Cromwell. Henry has got the divorce that he's always wanted, and it's all down to the man Cromwell, the blacksmith or the brewer's or the textile worker's son, who's risen to power through the ranks and got Henry what he always needed. So in 1533, Thomas Cromwell had already been made Chancellor of the Exchequer, so he already had an incredibly powerful role. But in 1534, after securing the divorce, Thomas Cromwell now becomes officially Henry VIII's Principal Secretary. Principal Secretary to us basically means Chief Minister. So, born in around about 1485, then by 1534, we see that Thomas Cromwell has already become Henry VIII's Chief Minister. But as you can probably imagine, this didn't last long, and he ended up the same as Cardinal Wolsey, except Thomas Cromwell lost a little bit more. So back in 1533, all thanks to Thomas Cromwell's ability in getting Henry VIII's divorce and his marriage to Anne Boleyn, he was made Chancellor of the Exchequer. This was a really powerful role that put him in direct control of England's taxation system. So he was in charge of the king's finances. It's one of the most powerful roles in government. However, after the Act of Supremacy, and in getting Henry the power over the Church of England as well as over the nation as a whole, Thomas Cromwell was rewarded even more. This is when he was promoted to the role of Principal Secretary, Henry's Principal Secretary. To you and me, we might as well think of this as Chief Minister. So 1534, this is the year that Thomas Cromwell becomes Henry VIII's Chief Minister. Unfortunately for Thomas Cromwell, this kind of glory and power wasn't to last very long. And just like many other people in Henry VIII's government and in Henry VIII's love life, he was pretty soon to lose something close to him. So his career finished almost as quickly as it rose.